scripture for this morning, upon which Mike will be focusing, comes from the Gospel of Luke, the 18th chapter, beginning with the 9th verse. Hear these words. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. This reveals to us the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Kyle, is there any significance to you turning toward Ed when you said this tax collector? Okay, just wondered what that was about. Okay. There is a Peanuts comic strip which features Charlie Brown at Lucy's psychiatric help stand. Charlie has gone there seeking some great truth about how to live his life. And Lucy tells him, when you're getting a drink of water in the dark, always rinse out the glass because there might be a bug in it. 5 cents, please. Charlie Brown sighs, great truths are even more simple than I thought they were. Charlie's right. Some of life's greatest truths are painfully simple, which is certainly the case in today's scripture. You don't need a master's of divinity to get the point of the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. In fact, any of you could preach this sermon this morning just as well as I can. Notice the position of humility that I'm taking right now. Anyway, Jesus is presenting us with one of life's simpler truths. Now, as we read that, of course, we know as Jesus shared this parable, he was not condoning the actions nor the lifestyle of the tax collector. Because if that tax collector was anything at all like most tax collectors of that day, no matter how you define the word sinner, he fit the bill. He undoubtedly needed to be forgiven. He desperately needed God's grace to change him and his lifestyle. On the other hand, Jesus was not condemning the standards or the faithfulness of the Pharisee. Here was a man who lived by an unquestionable morality. He even went the second mile in his faith. According to the custom of that day, every faithful Jew was required to fast 1 day a year on the Day of Atonement. But this man chose to seek special merit and fasted twice a week. In the Levitical law, God commanded that everyone tithe, that is, give 10% of their produce, but this man tithed everything, even things he was not obligated to tithe. Yes, here was a man whose commitment went way above and beyond the call of duty. And Jesus was not saying, don't do that. In fact, in other sections of the Bible, Jesus makes it perfectly clear he expects his followers to go the second mile. No, Jesus' concern was not the man's actions. It was his attitude. His attitude toward himself. His attitude toward other people. And ultimately, his attitude toward God. He simply got a little arrogant, full of himself. And Jesus is saying God does not look favorably upon any form of arrogance. Jesus' warning. There is something about life, something about the laws God has put into place that eventually blesses those who are humble and humbles those who are arrogant, whether it be in this world or in that life which is beyond this world. It's as simple as that. And we all pretty well know that that is one of life's truths. Oh, I know there are times when we might question that truth, times when humility sounds weak and spineless, because there's so many of our role models in this day and age that are aggressive and they're manipulative, they're self-centered and they're condescending. And for a while it seems that they have it made in the shade. Everything they do seems to prosper. They always seem to get their way. However, deep down inside of us, we know the time is coming. Sooner or later, the time is coming when those who exalt themselves are going to be humbled. And to be totally honest with one another, isn't there something kind of satisfying about, in the words of my granddaddy, those who get too big for their britches finally get their comeuppance? In other words, the arrogant finally get what they deserve. That reminds me of a story that I read about Tommy Bolt, who was a professional golfer in the 1950s. Tommy had earned the reputation of being a man of tremendous arrogance. An arrogance that on many occasions translated into outbursts of anger, yelling at people, even throwing and breaking golf clubs. One tournament, Tommy drew a caddy who had a reputation for talking. When Tommy introduced himself, he told the caddy not to talk on the course and only speak to him as "Yes, Mr. Bolt," and "No, Mr. Bolt," and only speak when he was asked to speak. The rules were set. Tommy was in charge. Well, near the end of the tournament, Tommy was in sight of first place. But as things tend to go in golf, he hit a drive that went a little bit off the fairway. It appeared to stop by a big tree. For his recovery shot, Tommy had to look long and hard how to hit the ball without hitting branches and still make it to the green. Tommy looked at the shot and then he turned to his caddy. "Shall I hit my 5-iron?" The caddy replied, as instructed, "No, Mr. Bolt." "What do you mean I shouldn't hit my 5-iron?" Bolt hissed. "Just watch this." "No, Mr. Bolt. No, Mr. Bolt," warned the caddy. Tommy Bolt sneered. He stepped up to the ball. He hit it with a 5-iron. It landed within a few feet of the pin. "There. How do you like that?" said Tommy. "Now you may talk." The caddy looked at the ball up on the green close to the hole. He looked back at the spot under the tree where it was hit, and he said, "Mr. Bolt, that was not your ball." His arrogance cost Tommy Bolt 2 strokes for hitting the wrong ball, first place, and more money than most of us would make in a lifetime. Those who exalt themselves. There's a legend that centers around the great prophet Elijah, as Elijah confronts some people who have succumbed to the allure of arrogance. The legend goes like this. Once there was a rich family who were well respected in their community as righteous and generous people. They were celebrating the marriage of their daughter to a young man from another family of wealth and position. During the celebration, Elijah showed up disguised as a beggar and asked to be admitted to the party. The bride's parents refused, of course, since they knew all beggars like to come to such events for the free food and to pick the pockets of the guests. So he was banished from the event. As soon as Elijah was out of sight, he changed into a wealthy nobleman with a carriage. And in that disguise, he arrived at the wedding party asking to come in. Well, this time the family welcomed him in with open arms, even though they didn't know him. As he was entering the great hall where the event was being held, Elijah suddenly stopped and he began to remove his clothes. When the host saw that their honored guest was doing, they tried to stop him. And according to the legend, Elijah responded to their pleas saying, "But it's only my clothing that you want. For when I arrived a short time ago dressed as a beggar, you sent me away. So it must be my clothing, not me, that you welcome. For I am the very same person." As you can imagine, the family stood shamed, for they realized that both the beggar and the nobleman were Elijah, who had held a mirror up to them before all their friends and before God. Those who exalt themselves. Back when I was in junior high, one of my favorite teachers was Mr. Cooper. Now, not only was he a teacher at my school, but he was also my Sunday school teacher. I remember we had a student teacher in our class one semester. And there was this particular day when we had finished our assignments for the day, and we had about 5 minutes before the bell would ring for us to go to the next class. So I was talking to Mr. Cooper. I mentioned something about Sunday school. And the student teacher overheard the conversation and said, "Mr. Cooper, I didn't realize you were a Sunday school teacher. You know, I'm just over a year old. I went and I got myself baptized and I was saved on March the 7th of last year. Are you saved, Mr. Cooper?" And Mr. Cooper replied, "I suppose I am." "You suppose you are? I'll bet you're just like every other Methodist. You don't even know when you were saved." "Well, as a matter of fact, I do," said Mr. Cooper. "I was saved on the same day that you were." "You were saved on March the 7th, asked the student teacher. "No," came the reply. "I was saved on a Friday afternoon, 2,000 years ago, when Jesus, hanging on the cross on a hill called Calvary, said, 'Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.' You see, it wasn't what I went and did. It was what Jesus did that saved me." The essence of genuine humility is the realization of our limits. That is the realization it is only by the grace of God that I have any talents or abilities. It's only by the amazing grace of God that I have what resources that are available to me. It's only by the amazing grace of God that I have the gift of life itself. It's only by the amazing grace of God that Christ has touched my life, making a difference in the way that I live. It's only by the amazing grace of God that I've been saved. And in just a few moments, we're going to sing one of our favorite hymns reminding us of that truth. A simple truth that can make a profound difference. For there's just something about arrogance, about being condescending, patronizing, judgmental. Something about it that is divisive, that causes us to be dissatisfied, eventually disappointed, to become cynical, even negative. On the other hand, humility is kind, considerate, loving, and compassionate. In fact, it's life-giving. It was when Jesus humbled himself and went to the cross. It continues to be life-giving today. Such a simple truth that makes a profound difference. And yet, more often than I like to admit, I have read that parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and I have felt relieved that I am not like that Pharisee. I have thought how glad I am that I am not arrogant like some other people that I know. And it's about that time that I hear that still small voice say, Mike, you had better read that parable once again. It may be simple, but you just missed the point.